That's nothing the initiative does. Senate Bill 213 doesn't do that.
Right.
Okay, I think we had a question right here, and I'll we're going across. You and head over here. Could you introduce everybody? Introduce yourselves as you ask your question.
My name is Ray Trout. I'm seeking indication of a safeguard because we're aware of a national trend towards privatization of schools. Start the school, turn it over to the free enterprise, and I would like to see that slowed down a lot. What kind of a safeguard do we have against this national trend to privatize and changing open neighborhood schools into schools which are not open? They're funded publicly, but they're not necessarily open publicly. What kind of safeguards in this legislation is there to protect us?
Is a question for anybody in particular?
I can try and address.
Okay.
And I have to, Arturo and I might sometimes disagree on things, but some of the things we highly agree on. One of the reasons I think I've endorsed you every time. And charter schools, which I am a proponent of charter schools, but I think I agree with Arturo, we need to pass legislation, and I've been an advocate for it, and it's not gone through, but to say that districts are the ones who charter schools, not the state or any other entity, because we empower the local school boards to make decisions for what's best in those districts. They should have the ultimate say, not some statewide entity to come in and say that. And then we, at the same point, need robust accountability. And I tend not to. There's charter schools. There's your neighborhood schools. What I want is quality schools. And there are great charter schools, and there are horrible charter schools. And Denver does a good job with the school board of looking at the charter schools and as much with the power that they have to try and get rid of the bad charter schools and turn around the bad neighborhood schools as well. But they need more resources to be able to do that. This bill doesn't address that, but it's one of those issues I think we as a legislature need to try and address because this is, as we look at how do we get the best education, we need to look at the local school boards understand what's going on with their districts. They better than I do. Me in the legislature, I get briefed on what's going on in the districts, and now as a parent in DPS, I'm definitely much more aware than I was, just over a year ago when we didn't have our daughter. But it is, there are things we need to do. This bill doesn't necessarily address that exact issue, but I think overall we are improving the system significantly with this, both legislation and initiative. We are going to get better neighborhood schools.
Great, thank you. We had a question here in the middle, in the second row. Well, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Connie Nutt. We had 2 kids that went through Denver Public Schools. My question is for Will, and I think it's my misunderstanding. I understood this was a 5% income tax increase. And if that's correct, and you say when you're going door to door that it will raise your tax $188 a year, what are you basing that on?
Yeah, I can certainly answer that. The actual number is 133, not 188. It's based on the average median income, which is $57,000 a year, taxable income. So that's adjusted down from gross income, which is more complicated tax policy than we probably need to get into. But that's the number that's based on. If it would be helpful for folks, I can get into more detail on the percentage tax increase. If not, I don't need to get into it.
Why don't you give the 2 tiers?
Sure, I can explain the 2 tiers if you'd like. Right now in Colorado, we have a flat rate on state income. Everybody pays 4.63% on their taxable income. What this initiative will do is it will raise an earner, the state tax rate on an earner's first $75,000 of income from 4.63% to 5%. And then incrementally on any income that an earner makes above $75,000 from 4.63% to 5.9%. And so it creates a 2-tier income structure rather than a flat structure.
Now see, that, just for your interest,
Yeah.
that's something that will be misunderstood,
Right.
because I thought it was adding
A 5% increase as opposed to
So I
increasing
think
to
that needs to be
5%.
made real
Good,
clear.
and it's on all of our campaign literature, just so you know.
But
And
just reading the paper, that's the feeling I wrote.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And not only is that aspect difficult, but communicating to people that what a 2-tier income tax structure is complicated. We're gonna try and make that as easy as possible for you.
And two things to note, just because there are some people who are saying, this is groundbreaking that we have a two-tier tax system in Colorado. Prior to '80s, for most of our history of when we've had an income tax, it's been a multi-tiered system. It was not even just a two-tiered system. I think in most of the years it was a four-tiered system. So this is nothing groundbreaking in terms of where we are in terms of policy. And two, the Blue Book, which we'll be getting done in the next month, will be going out to everyone, which will have a very detailed explanation. I mean, I think it's one of the best things we do in terms of informing voters is sending out those Blue Books. And hopefully that will help a lot of people, because there'll be a lot of graphs and charts showing exactly, from a visual perspective, what's going to happen to each individual voter.
All right, I'm going to keep getting around, but I know John's got a question we're going to get to, and then get back to the audience.
I wanted to ask you a question. When you talked about the changes in the formula to improve equity, I'm very concerned about equity, and I noted that Chief Justice Bender has dissenting decision on the bottom.
You can't hear the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should stand up and talk louder. Chief Justice Bender, in his dissenting opinion on the Lovato case, pointed to inequities in funding. And he said the biggest inequities were due to differences in taxation due to geography. But the formula the adjustment you talked about don't touch that. Most of the school districts spend a lot more than the formula, and for example, Aspen spends 5 times or 4 times the formula, and they get that money from local taxation. So it still seems to me that the sort of $2,000 adjustment that will happen inside the formula doesn't come close to achieving equity across the across geography. What do you have to say about that?
It's an outstanding question, and it gets into the very technical, technical issues within the school finance formula. And something that Colorado allows, and something that a lot of states allow, is for local school districts to increase funding for their district and only their district outside of formula, and provide more funding for their schools. I don't need to tell anyone in this room yet, because Denver passed one of these 3As and 3Bs last year. That's exactly what that is. Now, a problem we have in Colorado is that we have widely disparate property tax values. In some places like Aspen, we have 10 times, 50 times the assessed property valuation that we do in other districts. The other thing we have are widely disparate voting populations. We have some that will very eagerly support a property tax increase outside of the formula for their schools. In others, we have very conservative voters that will never vote for that. One thing Senate Bill 213 does, which is a huge plan on equity, and I think addresses some of what Justice Bender was referring to in his opinion, which I didn't talk about earlier just because it's very nitty-gritty, is the state will now do something called mill levy override equalization, which is very complicated. But it's easiest, I think, the easiest way to think about it is that in places where property values are very low, the state will match with state funds what a local district can raise locally to ensure that that local district has at least the average capacity to raise funds outside the formula, comparable to the rest of the state. And so, whereas a school district now in the San Luis Valley would never be able to pass a mill levy override to have revenues equal outside of the formula to a place like Aspen, the state will now come in and say, if you can pass a mill levy election, we will match that to ensure you at least get the statewide average revenue per student to support your schools. Now, what we haven't solved is...
That means revenue in terms of total expenses?
That means in terms of the amount that the property tax raises. Does that answer your question? So let's say that...
So the property taxes in Aspen raise a lot of money.
Yeah.
So does it say that average? Is that included in
No.
the average, or?
Well, Aspen is included in the average, but it's a statewide average. So,
Right.
so if you pass...
I don't mean to match Aspen, but I mean you include Aspen's
You-
big number
You
in
include
the
Aspen.
average.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing we're not solving in this is that we still have districts that have very recalcitrant voters who never approve a tax increase. We have Tabor. We're not solving that in this. That's why we're here. That's why we're asking you to approve a tax increase. And so we will still have districts where it's very hard to pass a mill levy override. But an anecdote I think is somewhat helpful is, I've met a lot of farmers and ranchers on the Eastern Plains that know a good deal when they see one. You know, where perhaps they were not willing to vote on something before because it was going to generate so little money. Now that the state is, offering this carrot that says we're going to match it if you pass it, that's a little bit better of a deal. It doesn't solve Tabor and the issues with Tabor necessarily, but it does provide an incentive for a district to vote yes on a mill levy override. So I think we're getting at that equity issue in a way actually that we haven't for 20 years, in a way that's contributed to that.
Thanks. Let's get some more questions in. Got Ed over here.
Yeah, Ed Shackelford. What I see here, even as important as the money, is the leadership at the principal level. I did happen to be involved with interviewing principal candidates for one school and was embarrassed at the quality of the potential candidates brought for us to select from. And all of them were rejected, and the second round was rejected. If you don't have good principals, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at. And I want to know what in this bill is going to train and provide for a pool of upcoming principals. Because if you don't have that, the bill doesn't do it.
Some of the things when we look at the reforms, like 191, where it has, effectiveness not just for teachers, but for principals, and money for training. And how do you, a lot of the principles that come from the teaching corps. That's what both my parents did. Both my parents were, my mom was a phys ed teacher, my dad was a social studies teacher. They both became principals, and then my dad became superintendent of high schools for New York City. And, so you get the quality teachers. Some want to stay in the class, and that's great, because we want them in the class, but some want to go up and be principals. And so making sure we have the funding for career ladders, training for effective teachers, and to bring them into the system. And one of the things that we look at and I think is really beneficial about some of the changes we've made is trying to get effective teachers to help teach and train other teachers. And then when you look at when you want to be a good principal, those teachers who are able to train those teachers and know how to work with them are going to be able to be in that position as a principal to spot the good teachers, to see where people are struggling, to step in and help those because they were doing it when they were a teacher. So a lot of those programs we've done through this initiative and through 213 will start to be funded in a robust way. And I do think we will see a significant improvement with that, because we're going to be able to retain effective teachers who will then move on and move into the administrative roles. That, as my parents always said, the way you can know if you have a good school or not is just meet with the principal. The principal is the most important person in the school because they set the tone. You can have a bad school with a good principal, but you can't have a good school with a bad principal. You need effective, good leaders at the top to be able to make sure you have that good school. And I think this will, in a lot of ways, put some of the things we know will work, career ladders especially, into place in robust ways where we can actually really make sure we are taking those good teachers and building them, continuing to build them, and moving them up as they want to. We don't want to take amazing teachers if they don't want to go be principals. They should stay in the classroom teaching the kids, but if they want to go, we need to give them the resources and the skills to move into that, into those positions.
Yeah, Arthur?
Obviously we're going to disagree about the policies we already have on the books and their ability to provide good leadership and good teachers. So I have a different opinion about SB 191. But I think we can all agree, and ladies and gentlemen, let's just be honest. If we really want this to pass, let's be honest that this bill is not going to fix all those policy issues. And just ask and hold our state legislators accountable to address those other issues, whether we're going to pass this or not. I'm not trying to rain on the parade. I'm just saying, let's be honest. Let's keep our eye on the ball. We don't have a good system for cultivating new leadership in the schools right now. We don't have a state legislation that actually facilitates that in terms of teacher preparation and in terms of principal school leadership preparation at the state level. That's some more legislation that we haven't seen from the state legislators. We need that legislation. We need that legislation to require that teachers do and school leaders do more of a clinical internship before they enter into, that they are trained in diverse communities with high-need students and diverse students. And right now we don't have that. I'm not saying don't vote for this right now, but I'm saying it doesn't address it, and we need that legislation as well.
Okay, let's try to get a few more questions in and maybe about 10 more minutes. Maybe that could be 5 questions if people kept their answers fairly short. So we'll try to get around, and then again, I hope you stay afterwards and mingle more. Jeannie Kaplan?
Jeannie Kaplan, DPS School Board. I probably should know this, but our school board wasn't part of the negotiation or the discussion. Can you explain a little bit more about the innovation part of this? I mean, I think we can all agree on pre-K, we can all agree on ECE, we can agree on, what was the other thing that you said? The at-risk. I mean, there's a lot that's positive in this. The Innovation Fund really makes me nervous because I think it's a lot of money that's going to go to charter schools. And, you know, that's the reality, but let's talk about it. What is the Innovation Fund, or is it a fund to fund schools that are non-union schools?
It's a good question. The Innovation Fund is created by Senate Bill 213 to fund districts and schools for innovative projects. What it's really targeted toward, to be honest with you, are schools that want to offer an extended school day or school year. And we know that that is something that, if it's done well, can have a huge impact on students' learning and can prevent the summer achievement gap and can ensure that a kid gets enrichment opportunities that they might not get otherwise. And so a district or a school would have to apply for that to get that. Can charter schools apply for it? Yes. Can innovation schools apply for this fund? Yes. It's targeted toward schools and districts that in our school performance framework are turnaround, priority improvement, or improvement. DPS would be one of those. I will say that what applicants have to show, and they apply, it's a competitive grant type application to an independent board. What they have to show is that their project will have the sort of impact on student learning that you would like to see out of one of these projects. They have to apply to renew annually, and the project can be funded for more than 5 years.
So can I just ask that if this does pass and this does go into effect, that we really do assess this? Because one of the things we're seeing in the Denver Public Schools is longer days are leading to huge discipline problems.
Sure.
So that needs to be part of the ongoing conversation. We need to have the realistic, honest conversation that just putting in a longer day isn't necessarily a good thing. It has to be a longer day with proper instruction, proper results, and time to really decompress. I mean, these kids cannot go to school for 8 hours a day to learn how to fill in a bubble.
Yes. And what I was not saying is that that board is going to approve a grant for anyone that wants to offer an extended school day. I mean, you have to show what you're going to do with the day. You have to say, this is why we want to offer an extended school day, and this is what we're going to do with kids in that time.
All right.
Maybe one point I think is actually really relevant to this, if I could.
Go ahead.
The Innovation Fund, like everything in Senate Bill 213, is statutory. There may be a lot of things in that bill that different folks in this room are skeptical about. But we can't raise money by statute. We can't increase funding for our schools unless we vote yes on a ballot, and we do that this fall. So you may have reservations about things in the bill. You may have reservations about 190. But if you think we need more funding for public schools, this fall is your chance. And this chance is not coming again, and I can tell you that. There is not going to be a coalition like this that is this broad, with this good of a chance of passing, that's going to come anytime again soon. So there are a lot of things we could talk about that we could change. I just want folks to know that the chance to increase funding for schools is this fall, regardless of what you think about Senate Bill 213.
Thank you. Thad and
Yes.
This is actually a two-part question. The first part, you said to personalize this, so I'm just wondering, if we started at a time and place for school that didn't have kindergarten and now are at an age where we have a little extra time, will this bill allow us to go back for a full-time?
I think that would help you a lot, Ben.
It will change my whole life. Yours also.
I'll help pay for it.
More seriously, okay, although almost all research indicates that indeed there is a correlation between increased funding and school performance, that connection is incredibly delayed and complex, okay? And so I get really nervous when you start talking about this bill is going to provide measures of the return for spending. And, you know, it can lead to incredible oversimplification. It can also lead to conclusions that spending, which really long-term is going to have an effect, is a failure because those effects don't show up really soon. And so, are there consequences? How are you going to measure it? And, you know, is it going to be ammunition to argue that the funding is not successful?
Yeah, I can. You know, there is no what the consequences are that we all agree, I think, that transparency is good. That we should have more.
What are the measures that you're going to try and link to funding?
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying. Transparency is good so people have information. In terms of the funding, in terms of where that's going and how the formula, that's not linked to that exact transparency information. So the formula will not change depending on outcomes within schools. Now what will happen, as always does, is you guys and the 5 million people in the state who see this transparency and get this information will call their legislators and say, well, you know, what's going on here? Or call the school board and hold them accountable to what's going on. There's no direct tie between this increased revenue we're talking about and the information we're getting in terms of
Oh, I thought
outcomes.
that you were saying that there was
No.
going to, well, he's nodding his head yes.
Well, we're gonna measure that.
Right.
There's a study that is commissioned by Senate Bill 213 that will do that, but there's nothing that then says, if this study doesn't do this, then the funding
Okay,
has to.
and what is the study going to link funding to?
Yeah, well,
And how is it going to link funding to it?
and by link funding here, we don't mean adjust funding, right? We just mean.
No, I'm
Right.
saying,
Yeah.
how are you going to measure the relationship between funding and outcomes, and what outcomes are you trying to demonstrate are directly relatable to the funding?
And I gotta ask you to do that in about 30 seconds and we'll move on.
We're gonna use things like graduation rates, dropout rates, college remediation rates, because those are the things we have. Do they properly measure the complex question, does spending matter? No, I don't think so necessarily, but it's a study, and that's why no states do this. But we're not gonna do it until 4 years after the full formula is implemented. And even then, we're not gonna be able to measure things like, did investing in early childhood provide outcomes? Because the kids won't have gone through the system.
That's right.
And that's why the link is just, the link is studying, the link is not adjusting, I think that's true.
Okay, you just get a few more questions in. Did you still have a question? You had one earlier, I think?
Well, I just wanted to hear a little more about the financial incentives for some of these policy issues, the innovative schools and the charter schools. Is there going to be an aspect of the bill that's going to increase spending for those particular types of schools versus other schools?
If I may add to, I think there was a earlier talk about the innovation fund and extended learning, having a longer day. That piece will, by design, give charter schools and schools that are outside of the union contracts for teachers a leg up on applying for those funds, because they're already designed to have the longer day. They already have employees that don't have a say in the school day and how the school day will function. So I think by design that does give those schools a competitive advantage. And as was stated before, if a longer school day is not done properly, we can all agree if it's not done properly, I would say it's a waste of money. And it's not very innovative unless it really does provide for outcomes. We can't even agree on the outcomes in terms of the measurements, And we saw that through Senate Bill 191 that was based on multiple measures with weight towards the student test scores being 51%, isn't supported by best research anywhere. This is similar. We're kind of providing numbers and studies, but not really measuring, and we're providing an advantage to certain schools, in my opinion.
Well, and I would have to disagree on that, because one of the things, and I think what you said was, a lot of charter schools are already doing extended day, extended year. Well, by essence, if they're already doing it, it's not innovative that they're doing it. And when they apply and say, or if they tried to apply and said, well, we're gonna innovate by doing what we're doing, that's not innovative. We're not gonna give them more money to do what they're already doing. It's how do we get schools to do things that we think will work. And I do have to disagree also, because I think when you look at the studies, and you look at early childhood education, you look at teachers